start with this. I still want to talk about the truth. The thing that's been really on my mind, and I dealt with it a couple Sundays ago, and here, and this probably will say, because it's still something that I'm looking at, but we always say that and it ends up being just wrong with everything. But it's about, we covered it to some degree. We looked at it a little with Ezekiel the other class, with what God revealed and what necessitated God revealed. And that was a spiritual house, a house that differed in every way from the previous house, in measure, makeup, in glory. And that house had to be revealed. That house need you to know the dimensions, to know the fullness and all that house was. There was a man that had to bring you in and measure that place in your sight. And he had to bring you where you were brought, and everywhere you were brought, he had to measure that place. It was a vision of absolute dependence. God himself had to show this. And that's what we've come to. And the thing that I find that is the real problem in the majority of people, Christian people, is this: it has to do with the form. The form of reality. Where do you look to find it? What gives evidence to the divine, to the spiritual, for you? And this is where it all comes down to. To me, this is what knowing the truth is all about. This is where the liberty that is promised by Jesus to those who are knowing the truth, this is where it all comes down to. Where do you look to find reality? What form defines reality to you? To most people, it is the form that has always defined reality. We just think God is tweaking that form and making it better. There's I don't know if I have it on this one. Well, anyway, you guys know the verse. We dealt with it. It's kind of been a foundation verse, especially when I was there with you guys. It was a foundation that we may present every man perfect in Christ. And, in the complete Jewish Bible says that we may present every man as having come to the goal, that which is complete, perfect. There was a translation that I copied, and it's in my eSword. I think it's on the other computer up at the Research Center. But it said that we would come to the point, this is what the gospel was, this is what they preached for, that we would finally come to the point that we would be able to demonstrate the perfections of Jesus to the world. And to me, that is the exact opposite of what Paul means. That is how man has defined this reality from a form that he always looks at and tries to define the reality that God himself is in a form that he is familiar with. So you say righteousness. we say manifesting of Jesus, and we use all these terms. Well, what does that mean? That means me demonstrating to the world Jesus and the attributes. And I've said many times, Jesus was not even successful if that's the way. You know, the world will see it and they'll fall down at our feet and say, oh, I see Jesus in you. They didn't see Jesus in Jesus. You know, they called him, you know, Beelzebub. He did these things by the power of Beelzebub, and he, you know, evil, and all of the things that they said. And he was Christ in their midst, and they didn't know him. Why? Because the form that he had made it impossible for them to know him. That's why when he tells Peter, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, Peter, because the flesh and blood that he lived in on earth could not demonstrate his true being to them. No word he said could do it. No action. They could look at the actions and convey upon him their interpretations. And that's what we do. But the form was something altogether different. The true form, where reality is seen, could not be seen with a natural Jesus walking with it. And throughout his ministry, he always pointed to a greater form, a greater reality that was coming, that he was in their midst, but that would be apprehendable when he comes again in spirit. So this is what we're talking about, the form. One of the verses that's been on my mind with regard to this is, there's a couple of them. We'll look at both of them maybe tonight. The first one, and this is just introducing this thought, and we're going to go from there. But this takes into it everything we said in Hebrews 6 about no longer laying again the foundation. Because of the form of those things, they were something that a greater substance, of a greater reality. Therefore, in this perfection you've come to, the demand of the Spirit of God is not to relay and revalidate those things, but to allow the Spirit of God to bring you on and show you the perfection of those things in the person of Jesus Christ. Now, I'm speaking of this in the context of Scripture. What we've done in the Christian world today is just made up a lot of stuff. You know, our natural pursuits and our things and our religion, it's not even valid. Never has been. What the Jews had was valid. It was real because it was a very real, very God-given testimony of a greater reality that would come and dwell in us. So when he's saying, do not further validate or lay again those foundational, elementary things, because those things have been put away. We have gone away from those things, the elementary teachings concerning the Messiah. You don't need the teachings concerning him. You don't need the picture that describes him when you have him. And this is what he's saying to me. To hold on to the fragmentary picture is to miss the substance. Do not hold to the picture and miss the substance. Allow the Spirit of God to bring your soul into an experience with the substantial divine reality that is Christ himself. That is why in all of that, and to preface all of that, he tells them that they need their senses exercised. And that's spiritual senses, the senses of the soul, must be exercised continually, unveiled, so that the recognition can come in your soul between what is good and what is evil. Now see, again, even good and evil, we put our form on. In truth, good has only one form that defines it. And evil has only one form that defines it. Good is him, evil is me, and everything that pertains to me. It's everything, it's man and that system under which man was found under the law. Everything of it. This tells you how Paul looked at it. Paul looked at men under the law, men who have taken that form beyond its appointed time. And he sees it as an evil thing. He sees it as sin. When he talks about sin, he's not talking about 99% of the time, he is not talking about the things we name sin today. He's talking about man trying to imitate a spiritual reality. To be or take unto yourself that which only Christ is. That's evil. That's sin. And the only real difference, the true discernment that has to come into the soul, is when the soul sees the proper form of reality. Remember, we talked about it in one of the commentaries. He said, in the coming of Christ, the coming of Spirit and truth instead of the law that was given, grace came, Spirit and truth came, Christ came to dwell in the soul, bringing about in his coming everything that Moses merely pointed to in the giving of the law. And he said when he came, reality came in its apprehensible form. It came in the form that it was intended to be apprehended. It couldn't be apprehended in feasts, holy days, temple rites and ceremonies, and sacrifices and offerings. You know, why did God say, those things I have no pleasure in, those things I desire not? I mean, they give me no pleasure. It wasn't because he did not originate those things as a testimony. It was that they were not the true form that the testimony testified of. That's why Hebrews 10 says the law is a shadow but not the very image. That's the true very image, means true essential form of the thing. The form that casts the shadow as a testimony. Until that superior, more excellent form appears, we will look to the other to find evidence and substance and truth. We will look at that and we'll point at it and say, that's real. When Paul could look at it and say, it's a shadow. We'll say, righteousness is not doing bad things and doing good things. And you can say, righteousness is Christ and has no relation to the doing or not doing of anything. Now that blows people's mind. Why? Because all of these things have been defined in an inferior form. Us. We're the form that defines reality until the greater form appears. We're the thing that defines truth and perfection and completeness, even if we're just trying our best to get to it. We said that about, that we may present every man as having come to the goal, or come to that which is perfect, come to that which is complete. And that's all the same word in the Greek. Here's a verse that we still look at, and we talk about it, and we preach about it. And we still want it to happen, and we may even push it off. Most have pushed this off into the natural Jews and said, one day this will be fulfilled for them. But listen to the verse, and we're going to talk about it just a second. Jeremiah 29, in verse 11. We know this verse very well. Maybe not the address, but we know it. I know the thoughts I think toward you, saith the Lord. And boy, most of us will take these things, those who are not as eschatological and pushing it off to the Jew, we bring it to ourselves and we read those verses that may be in our bread box verses, and we think, oh, thank you, Lord, you think these thoughts toward me. No. He's speaking to the Son. He's speaking to that which was a testimony. His thought toward the people to whom the whole of the covenant and all the promises pertain. I know the thoughts I think toward you, saith the Lord. Thoughts of peace, not of evil, to give you an expected end. And some translations murder that verse and say, a future that is wonderful, or something like that, a great future. Why? Because we define these things in view of the wrong form, the wrong thing. We think they pertain to us. They are they that testify of me. He just put a greater form on the whole of the testimony. And they thought it was about them. Do you see why this greater reality demands spiritual understanding? Why it demands revelation? Why it demands God to reveal his Son? Because if he does not, you see you and everything is defined by you, or has you in its scope. Now, I know we've heard these things, but we need to rehearse these things. The word for peace there is completeness. My thoughts towards you are thoughts of peace. What he's saying to them is my thought concerning you, and you can use this word, not just thought, but my predetermination with regard to you is completeness. Faith, as Paul says, that will come to bring you to fullness, to bring you to completeness. And not of evil. And this is from the Vine's dictionary. This is the word evil in the Hebrew, and it means the word refers to something that is of poor or inferior quality. That's what they held to when they rejected him. And they had called that God, and they had said that was divine, and they had said that was given of God, therefore it must be real, and this man's an imposter. Why? Because he came in a form they knew not of. They were familiar with this. They could apply it to themselves. He came declaring, I am. That's another form altogether, isn't it? That's something totally contradictory to our earthly religious pursuits. When he says, I am, this is what that means. He is, and there is not another. You can't become it. You can't achieve it. I am it. And that's why they refused him, because they wanted theirs too. They wanted something else. Everything that pertained to them as promise and prophecy pertained to them in that it pertained to them as him. And to find anything or to receive anything of their promises, they had to receive it as who he was. And it's so much more so that way with it. So what do? Well, we pray our prayer and we receive Jesus, and then we begin to still define things according to flesh. When God's true and ultimate and only definition of all spiritual fullness is in our soul. And yet we're in love with a form. We have a form of God and deny the power. The power is the life himself, who defines it not in word but in presence. The one that everything he actually uttered to prophets and to the fathers through the prophets, every bit of it was defined, amen, and substantiated in one Son. Why does he start that out as the thesis statement of the letter to the Hebrews. Because in that one verse or two verses, he has just brought you from one form to another. To that which is inferior in quality, to that which is perfect and complete. This is the expected end he promised them, that which is of peace or completeness and not of inferior quality. God never looked to the testimony as an end. He looked to it as a testimony of the end. But he always had his end in view before he even created it, or else it wouldn't have had any basis to be created at all. And he says that in the very first chapter of Hebrews 2, by whom he made the worlds. This is the Son in whom he spoke. This is why it says in Hebrews 11, and this whole thing is bringing them from an inferior form to the substance, to the true form, to the perfect, complete form, that is spirit and truth. A form that demands we look for him to appear the second, and when he appears as a second, he appears without sin. And we're going to see that sin is not what we think. He doesn't appear, and in his appearing, everybody stops doing bad things. That is not the sin he's talking about. He is basically describing an entire age with that word sin. That which falls short of completeness. And he comes without sin. It's the same thing. Listen to these words. Paul says it in Romans 3. Righteousness without the law. Salvation without sin. Same thing. See, that lays heavy on the ear because we're not used to defining things in that way. We can't see sin as an entire age because we're still looking at sin as things we do. No, it's the age and the man that was under that age. It's all of that. Everything he put away sin. Everything he put away. It's all under that. Remember, God didn't care if you're a Jew or Gentile, he says in Romans 3. We're all under sin. Under sin. And then he starts, having said that, he appears without sin as full salvation. Then he begins to talk about the law being a shadow, but not the very image, that it could not, because of its nature, bring them to perfection or to the goal or to completeness, the completeness that comes in his coming, his appearing. The law could never bring them to that. See, what he's doing is bringing these people to the truth and desires for them to experience the liberty and the freedom of knowing that truth. A realization of a salvation that has only one true, defining, demonstrative object, and that's him. So what is your soul's desire? To see him, to look for his appearing. What does that appearing do? The liberty that is promised. And he says it in different terms in chapter 10 of Hebrews when he talks about the conscience being purged. That's why he uses the word from an evil conscience. Why? Because it's a conscience or an understanding that has been joined to that which is evil, to that which falls short, to that which is sin. And in the seeing of the surpassing greatness of him, when the true object of reality comes into your soul's view, then your soul is purged from that evil conscience because your knowledge is no longer joined to that inferior, evil thing, but is now inseparably joined to the perfection of Christ. Son in whom God has fully uttered his eternal thought and intent. This is knowing the truth. It's not just believing the Bible. It's about an experience of the soul with divine reality in its true, proper form. So the verses, this is the expected end. Let me show you this. The word end there, we know it as end as far as a hope, as far as the end or the completeness and all that. But here's what he says to them as well. I will give you an expected end, an end that you were hoping for. Basically, I'll give you the end that I hoped for in you. Whether they hoped for it, knew about it or not, they never really understood their hope. But God did. It's like us, born again, we don't understand what that means. We don't have a clue about the life and the fullness and completeness that's in us, but he does. And he works with us upon the basis of his knowing and not ours. Well, he did the same thing with them. So he's speaking to them of this expected end. I'll give you an expected end. The word expected, of course, we know that means an expectation or a hope, something longed for. But the word end is important. It doesn't just mean something complete, but it means a posterity. You know what posterity can also be called? A seed. How will I give you that hope you have always expected, that expectation? How will I give you my thought, which is completeness and not evil? I will give you that hope fulfilled in a seed, in a posterity. You see, they wanted the end of their hope, and they wanted it as seeds as of many, when it was to be realized only in the seed who is Christ. So it's not about you getting a good future. It is if we realize that he is the future that God always intended. But it's not about us getting anything. It's about him being everything. And God giving him as the fulfillment of his expectation in their midst. Just like God said, David is my king. Here's God's expectation in the midst of his people, and he says, here's my thought. Remember what he says in Isaiah? My thoughts are above your thoughts. You can't think this. This is not something you can understand. This is something beyond your scope here. And they will never come together. My thoughts are always above your thoughts, and above, my ways above your ways, as high as what? Heaven is from earth. There's your division. Above and beneath, heaven and earth. So the thought of God fulfilled, come to its consummate conclusion in a son, in a seed, in one man. And he comes and says, no man knows the Father but the Son. If you were to have the rest that you've desired, the rest, and that rest speaks of fulfillment, it speaks of Sabbath, it speaks of the Jubilee Sabbath, where all fullness comes. It speaks of the true rest that they were promised, where the Messiah would usher in a rest where there would be peace, prosperity. Remember Solomon that had peace and prosperity. Here's the greater than Solomon, the Messiah promised, and here's the rest that Solomon brought in testimony. And here comes the Son, who's the greater than Solomon. Here's the rest he's promising them. If you will have rest for your soul, you who are laboring under this evil age, Paul calls it, come unto me. See, there was the requirement. Come unto me. possess, or apprehend anything promised until you apprehend it as who I am, the Son of promise. Because it all belongs to me. All things are given. He says right before that, all things are given unto me of my Father. There's the extreme. But because God dealt with a multitude of people, they thought that was the form with which God always identified. But remember, we talked about the law, and that was never his view. He clothed them with a testimony of one perfect son, and even in Exodus 4, he declares Israel is my son. That's the way he always dealt with them. It was always in view of a single seed, a singular son who would live in all. Not be many, but one who lives in many. And defines God's relation and every relation he has. Every soul, he is that relation. That one and only relationship God has. The one and only fullness that God has to give as the gift of grace, he is. And the question comes, what form? In what form does that fullness come? Where will you see it? Well, the verse that come to my mind in the last few days, a couple of them, was Romans 12:2. We know this verse. Be not conformed to this world. The word is age. It's not the planet, it's an age. Be not conformed to this present age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, for proving what is the will of God, the good, acceptable, and perfect. That's from the Young's Literal. Now, here's the real question here. Here's the real thing that I've been thinking about. The word transform. Again, we have taken that word and applied it to our Christian religion, and we have made a real terrible thing out of it. Because we constantly have people in religion trying to be transformed and trying to transform themselves or trying to get God to transform them. Why? Because what's the proof of your transformation? You act better, you smile more, right? We always have those proofs. Your external proofs are the things that will prove your transformation. We have perverted this word. It does not mean an outward demonstration that'll show divinity in your mortal flesh. It means to be brought or translated from one form to another. Transform. We'll see another verse where this makes more sense. It's from the renewing of your mind. It's the same renewing of the mind. He talks about in Colossians. This is after he talked about the appearing of him who is our life. And this is really important because here's the two forms that he's contrasting. The form that is beneath and the form that is above beneath. The form that is beneath is a form you can step into and apply to yourself and try to be holy and righteous and all of that. But before he even warns them against such things, he tells them, you are complete in him. You have come to completeness. You have come to perfection. Now do not let any man beguile you of your reward. Remember, this is not beguiling you of the winning of the race. It is beguiling you of the prize after the race is won. We're still trying to win a race. And religion is just stripping us in our heart's understanding and experience from the prize of the race already being won. Remember, what's the verse? Know ye not that those who run a race run to win it, right? All run to win. Therefore run. Look it up in the original. Look it up in a good literal version. It'll say, therefore run as one having won the race. The prize is the problem. It's the same prize that Paul talks about, having seen the excellency of Christ, having seen him in the perfect form and not in the previous form that he boasted in. Having seen that greater form, he says, let me read it. I don't want to mess it up. Yea, doubtless I count all things lost for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them all but dung, that I may win Christ and be found in him, not having mine own righteousness which is of the law, but that which is through the faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith, that I may know him, power of his resurrection, the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable unto his death, if by any means I might attain unto the resurrection of the dead. Not as though I'd already attained or already perfect. That means come to a perfect understanding of this excellence. I may apprehend that to which also I am apprehended. Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward what? The mark for the prize of the high calling. He's seen the race won. He's seen all things fulfilled. He's just wanting in his soul to apprehend the prize of it. What is that? Christ himself revealed in his fullness. To know him. To apprehend him. Not to be, not to become, not to exhibit, but to know him who has come, who is, and is the full exhibition of all things. There's the prize. Now, the forms is these external things that they were going after because to them it proved something. To them it was righteousness. To them it was, but he says it's just because they're puffed up in the vanity of their own mind that those things find any validation, that those shadows are substantial to them in any way. The true reality comes when Christ, who is the life of the soul, appears. That which has always been the true form, that which has always been reality in its most perfect sense, appears in the soul, and we are made fully aware of it and come to know it as it is already known of God. And therefore, we can do what he says in the next verses, and that is mortify the members that are upon the earth. That means reckon as dead every natural effort to implement your members to achieve everything that only Christ is. You count it as dead. You count it as lost. Why? Because life himself has appeared. And bound up in that life is righteousness, holiness, and every other spiritual thing. Therefore, you can reckon as dead the members that are on the earth. And you will never try to achieve through those members anything else, because you found him to be everything you ever, in your vanity, tried to achieve. So remember, we've talked about this. The thing he says, mortify. If you read all of these things he talks about, it's the very same thing he talks about in the works of the flesh in Galatians 5. Up against the fruit of the Spirit. And again, that's not comparing bad deeds with good deeds. That's comparing him and you. Who are you at your best? Read it. That's you at your most religious. That's you at your most spiritual. That's you, and will always be you. And those attributes will always pertain to you, just like the attributes that are talked about as the fruit of the Spirit will always be him. He doesn't share it. You don't get a piece of it. It doesn't become who you are. It's always who he is. And he's showing you the foolishness of attempting to make the one like the other. That's the whole comparison there in Galatians 5. Because the whole comparison of the fruit and the works starts with him talking about Isaac and Ishmael. So that comparison is the same comparison as Ishmael and Isaac. And you can't make Ishmael Isaac. Because one son has inheritance and the other has no part of it. You see what we're talking about? Because this is where we're going. When he begins to talk to them about freedom or liberty from sin in John 8 by knowing the truth, they back up, and these are Jews that believed on him. And just think about that. He begins to tell them about the liberty they will have in knowing the truth, and they begin to hold on to their natural lineage and say, wait a minute, we've never been in bondage to any man. We're Abraham's seed. Rejecting and, I guess, forgetting their whole history and their current state of slavery under Rome. What does it all come down to? Sin. Liberty from sin. Not sinning, but sin. And what does that come down to? And it's an awesome thing, and we don't get it. It's been a struggle for me to really understand. He's talking about freedom from sin, and then he begins to talk about the slave versus the son, and that the slave does not abide in the house, but the son himself only abides in the house. But it makes perfect sense when you see that knowing the truth and the discernment and the liberty of knowing the truth brings about the discernment to know the difference between Ishmael and Isaac. Who has right to the household and who doesn't? Because until that distinction is made and that discernment comes into the heart, you're going to try to bring Ishmael in and make him a rightful promised heir, and he doesn't belong there. And you'll never know the liberty of truth. Because the truth is, I am. So, this transforming is the soul being brought from the inferior form. It's just like translated. But it's the soul coming to experience a greater form. And being anchored in a greater form, a form that is spirit, a form that can't be observed in natural ways and physical ways, but that is perfect and eternal and spiritual. And that does what? It's put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him, where there is neither Greek nor Jew. There's the renewing of the mind that brings about this thing. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. The renewing of the mind of Christ being revealed in us, causes our soul to see the form of perfection. And we'll see that the form of perfection has nothing to do with us. And liberty comes. Because you don't need circumcision when you've seen circumcision in its true form. That's why I said, stand fast in this liberty, guys. Don't try to go back to those things. You're going to go back to them. You will not stand in liberty until you see the true form. You will try to make God, just like he did with Ishmael, you'll try to make God bend his will to incorporate you in your efforts. The truth is singular in its substance. Truth is singular. So there, we'll talk about that more, not being conformed to the world or to that age, but transformed by the renewing of the mind. And then there's this other verse, and we'll talk about it more too. And this is 2 Corinthians 3:18. Same word is used. King James doesn't use that word. It uses the word changed. But it says, we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory as from the Lord who is the Spirit. That's the New American Standard. It's the same word. Transform. And this context of that word may make it easier for us to see how we are brought from one form to the other. That which was that administration of death to the administration of life. That which is taken away to that which remains. That which had a veil on it to him who has no veil. And guess what? This brings forth the liberty. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. The liberty comes in the soul. I wrote it here. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, because we're going to talk about this more. Liberty is experienced when the soul sees reality in the context of truth, in view of the proper and intended form. That's when liberty is really and truly experienced. And that's when you will not take liberty as an occasion to the flesh, because liberty is always attached to the truth. The reason men take liberty as an occasion to the flesh is because they try to find liberty while still seeing their flesh and knowing spiritual reality in view of their flesh. Then you can have that room. But when truth is seen, there is a judgment, and the liberty is always in view of judgment. It's always in view of one remains, and that leaves no room for anything else. No room. Can't be an occasion to the flesh. It can't be an occasion to sin, because you've seen reality in its perfect form, its perfect measure, and your soul is now anchored there. Liberty comes there. Freedom is found there. That's freedom from sin. That's liberty from sin and death. Because it's an object other than yourself that is now defined reality. The very object that has always defined reality in the sight of God. Now defining reality in your sight. So we'll stop there tonight. That's just something to get us started on this, thought about transformed, or being transformed and transformation and all of those things. Again, we have just totally messed these things up because we have defined them and misapplied them. We've defined them wrongly and misapplied them. The soul must be transformed, but that means the soul will be holding the truest form, the perfect form. And in beholding the perfect form, it is sanctified from that which is imperfect.